Hello, my name's DDavis. This is a conference paper that I presented in 2016 on using engineering optimization techniques to maximize the operating fleet operating on a site such as a construction site and still maintain compliance with the noise limits. There's a few different kinds of sites that have multiple noise sources operating simultaneously, such as mines and quarries and construction sites. And these sites usually have a different fleet that can operate during the day or the evening or the night. They usually have a mix of stationary and mobile equipment. The mobile equipment could be moving fast, such as trucks, or they could be moving slow, such as drills. You usually want, on a site like that, to maximize the productivity of these machines. You usually also want to comply with the noise limits that such a site has. And sites like this usually want to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So on a site like this that wants to maximize its productivity, they usually want to maximize the number of machines that they've got working. And the way you maximize things is by using engineering optimization. So what is optimization? It's either achieving the best possible result with limited resources, or it's achieving a specific desired result using the minimum resources, or it's achieving the best possible compromise between those two things. It's also important to understand what optimization is not. Optimization is not an engineer choosing a particular personal preference as their recommendation. So it's not an optimization method to simply recommend your favorite preferred solution. Optimization is also not just using your intuition. So an engineer who thinks that they've optimized something by recommending a solution that they feel is the best solution hasn't optimized the solution. Optimization is also not using a manual trial and error approach, because often there are far too many possible combinations of options that might work that can't all be investigated using a manual trial and error approach. There are many different types of optimization methods that are suitable for engineering type problems. For instance, there's linear programming, there's nonlinear programming, integer programming, stochastic programming, combinatorial optimization, which is what we'll be talking about today. There's heuristics and meta-heuristics methods and constraint satisfaction, just to name a few. There's a huge number of them. It's a huge field of mathematics. Let's have a quick look at some combinations. If you had 6 objects and you had 2 choices for each of those 6 objects, then you've got 64 possible options for combining those things. If you had 30 noise sources and you had 2 choices for each of those noise sources, which is either to have that noise source switched on or switched off, then you now have over 1 billion possible combinations for those noise sources to be either on or off. Now, it wouldn't be possible to build over 1 billion noise models and then sort through them to determine which one achieves the best overall outcome. And so we can use a combinatorial optimization technique such as the genetic algorithm to do that work for us. This algorithm is based on Darwin's principle of natural selection by mimicking the evolution of life. And the way it does this is by creating a population of possible solutions made up of many different random guesses. The method then breeds them with each other and mutates some of them, just like nature does, and then it throws away the bad ones, keeps the good ones, and it cycles around and around that process over and over again until it arrives at a very good answer. Because there's some randomness involved, you can never be sure that you have found the best answer, but you can be sure you have found a good one. So you start with a population of random guesses and you throw away the bad ones, you keep the good ones, you join them together, you create a whole new population, and you go round and round again. You throw away the bad ones and keep the good ones. And you can introduce some genetic mutation in the selection of solutions, and that helps to increase the randomness and helps to home in on a good solution. So let's say you had a construction site which has 3 different simultaneous work fronts. You have worksite number 1 over here, worksite number 2 over here, and you have worksite number 3 over here. And you have some noise receivers nearby. So they are going to be receiving different amounts of noise from each of the different work sites, depending on how close they are to each of the work sites. Let's say the site supervisor had a fleet of machines in mind that they would prefer to be able to use at all times. So there's 1 grader, there's 1 water cart, 2 rollers, 2 light vehicles, and 4 trucks and dogs. And the issue is that they would like to be able to use all of them at all times, but because of their noise restrictions, they will not be able to. So in our situation, we have 10 noise sources per site, and we have 3 sites. And each of those noise sources has 2 possible options, which are either on or off. That means that we have over 1 billion possible combinations of noise sources to be on or off. So if the work sites are allowed to operate either independently or all together, then if only worksite 1 is operating, then and all the noise sources are turned on worksite 1, then the noise limit is not complied with at receiver 3. If all the noise sources are on at worksite number 2, then the noise limit is exceeded at receiver 3. If all the noise sources are turned on at worksite 3, then the noise limit is complied with at all receivers. If all the noise sources are turned on all 3 work sites, then the noise limit is exceeded at receiver 2, receiver 3, and receiver 5. So if we look at worksite number 1, we see that a couple of the receivers are exceeding the noise limit, and if we allow the genetic algorithm to run, then it is switching noise sources on and off, and it will arrive at a conclusion where it's maximized the number of noise sources that are on at any time, and it says that if we switch off this one noise source, then we can comply with the noise limit at all receivers. So for worksite 1, the genetic algorithm has concluded that we can have our grader, our water cart, our rollers, we can have our light vehicles, and we can have 3 of the truck and dogs, not all 4 of them. And at worksite 2, if we let the genetic algorithm run, it switches noise sources on and off, and it converges to a solution where it recommends some should be off and some should be on. And all of the receivers are complying with the noise limits. And this time that the genetic algorithm ran, it said that we can comply with the noise limits at all of the receptors if the grader is switched off, and if one of the light vehicles is switched off, and if 2 of the trucks and dogs are switched off. Now, because the genetic algorithm includes some inherent randomness in its calculations, sometimes you get a slightly different answer. So 1 or more of these noise sources might be told to switch off or on for a different calculation result, but because one of the constraints is that the noise limit must be achieved, then you may get a different answer on which machines need to be switched on and off, but all of the time the noise limit will be achieved at all of the receptors. Now, there's no actual need to run the calculation for worksite 3, because the noise limit is actually achieved at all receptors with all of the noise sources switched on. But if we do run it, it will give us a result, and it should say that there's no need to switch any noise sources off. And that's indeed what it says. So, and as we already knew, there is no need to switch off any of the noise sources in order to achieve compliance with the noise limits at all of the receptors. Now, if we have all three of our work sites operating simultaneously, and we want to try and maximize the number of noise sources across all three of these work sites, then the genetic algorithm says that in fact we do need to switch off some of our noise sources at all three of our work sites. And in that case, the genetic algorithm says that you can't have your grader on any of your work sites, and you need to have only one roller on all of your work sites, and you shouldn't have all of your trucks and dogs operating at all of your work sites. And if you restrict how many machines are operating at any time on all three of your work sites, then you can comply with your noise limits at all of the receivers. So just a couple of final notes that this technique would also work very well for a much higher number of noise sources. You could, for instance, use this technique with hundreds of noise sources. You could also possibly use this technique if your noise sources had more than one possible state. For instance, it could have an off state and a low power state and a high power state. So like an off, a medium, and a high noise emissions state. And then the genetic algorithm could just as easily optimize which noise sources could be off, and also have two possible options for being on.